Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I would like to welcome you to episode 32 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. This is my first report of 2014, so I'd like to wish everyone a very happy new year. I hope you had a pleasant and enjoyable holiday season. I know I did. I was quite busy over the holiday season, however, and I'm pleased to announce the publication of two new books. The first one is Anti-Corruption and Anti-Bribery Leadership, which I authored with John Rydberg. John is the CEO and founder of the Orchid Advisors Group. John is well versed in a wide variety of anti-bribery and anti-corruption, not only laws, but policies, procedures, and implementations. We have designed this book to be read by a variety of folks, including compliance practitioners, lawyers, senior executives, C-suite executives, and board of directors. It is available in hardbound and ebook version, and I hope that you will check it out. You can find it on Amazon.com. Once again, it's Anti-Corruption and Anti-Bribery Leadership. The second book, which I've authored on a solo basis, is 2013, the FCPA Year in Review. In this, I take a look at every FCPA case over the past 12 months, both the individual and corporate enforcement actions. If you listen to episode 31 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report, you know I reviewed the corporate enforcement actions that have occurred, or that had occurred in 2013, rather. And in today's episode, I want to take a look at the individual enforcement actions. But if you want to have a little more detail on what I'm about to talk about, I hope you will go to Amazon. Once again, it's 2013, the FCPA Year in Review. It's available for ebook download on your Kindle. If for some reason you don't have a Kindle reader, if you'll email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com, we'll see what other arrangements we might be able to make for you. But I would like to visit with you today about all of the individual FCPA enforcement actions which occurred in 2013. I think there was a very large number of cases, and it was the second largest number of cases in recent memory regarding individuals. Certainly it was number two behind the year of the 2010, the Gunstein case, which had, I think, 24 individuals who were arrested. But there were several messages that the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission sent out over the year with their enforcement actions, and I'd like to go over those with you. In the first quarter of 2013, as with corporate enforcement actions, it was pretty quiet. So many people were speculating about what might have been going on with the DOJ or SEC. However, this period of quietness, if I can say that, ended with a relatively dramatic fashion, with the announcements of enforcement action against 4 individuals from the BizJet Corporation and initially 2 from Alstom, but this later expanded to 4, so I'd like to go over these. First, I would like to credit Mike Volkov for the following observation, which he made back in the spring, that 2013 would be the year of FCPA individual prosecution, and I think this was borne out by what happened over the past 12 months. In March, I was at the Dow Jones Compliance Conference in D.C., and there was an FBI agent who reiterated, or I should say emphasized rather, that the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the Securities and Exchange Commission would use all tools that were available to them for enforcement of the FCPA. This included wiretaps, video taps, cooperating witnesses, and all other tools that are available to them. This was borne out certainly in the spring of this year with several of the enforcement actions and carried forward through the rest of this year. But it all started with the BizJet individuals. And in the BizJet enforcement action, we had 4 individuals who had enforcement actions brought against them. Bernd Kolowski, who is the CEO president of BizJet, Peter Dubois, who's the VP of Sales and Marketing, Neil Ull, who's the VP of Finance, and Joel Jensen, who was a regional sales manager. Mr. Kowalski and Mr. Jensen are not U.S. citizens, and they are either on the lam or hiding, or they have not been found and they've not been served. But Mr. Dubois and Mr. Ull pled guilty to the charges brought against them. And interestingly, they became very strong and active cooperating witnesses for the Department of Justice. They wore wiretaps in the meetings. They provided other information to the extent that their cooperation led the Department of Justice to suggest very low sentences. In fact, one might even say almost no sentences for both of these individuals, given what they were looking at. Mr. Ohl was looking at 8 to 12 years of jail time for the offense to which he pled guilty. He was given 8 months home detention and 5 years of probation. Mr. Ohl was looking at 5 years of jail time, and he received 5 years of probation. Both of these individuals also paid fines. Nevertheless, the fines were relatively minuscule, or small rather, in the FCPA world. So right out of the bat, we have a couple of clear factors. One, the department is going to use cooperating witnesses. The department is going to have people wearing wiretaps in meetings, and they're going to bring a wide range of charges against many individuals. This certainly was true with the BizJet matter. Next up was the Alstom matter. Alstom is a French company, construction company, power construction company, and there were 4 individuals eventually who had enforcement actions brought against them. In April, there were 2, Mr. Frederick Periucci and Mr. David Rothschild. Mr. Rothschild pled guilty, but he has not been sentenced. Mr. Periucci was arrested. Later, a 3rd Alstom executive, William Pomponi, and then later a 4th executive was also arrested. So, and this is all involving one project, power project in Indonesia. Interestingly, there have been no charges brought against Alstom as a corporate entity. So this is a little bit unusual from what we've seen in the past from the DOJ and SEC. Typically, we see an action against a corporation and then later charges against individuals, similar to what we saw in BizJet. I should have noted that in the BizJet case, the charges were brought against the company, or the company agreed to the charges rather, in 2011, entered into a deferred prosecution agreement. So in the Alstom case, however, we have charges brought against the individuals first. So very interesting change of strategy for the SEC, or excuse me, the Department of Justice and the Alstom individuals who had prosecutions brought against them. Next up is Frederick Silnes. And if I had told you this story, you would probably think that I had made it up. But many times truth is stranger than fiction, and the Frederick Silnes matter is certainly one of them. It also shows the extent that the Department of Justice and the FBI will investigate matters and use all of the tools available to them. Frederick Silnes worked for an Israeli company called BSRG. BSRG obtained mining rights in the country of Guinea from the now deceased and former president. They did this by allegedly hiring one of his 4 wives, now widow, entering into contracts with her to pay her a substantial amount of money to get these contracts pushed their way, or I should say allegations that. At some point, Mr. Silnes contacted the now widow of the former president and said that he needed to get these contracts back. They arranged to meet at the Jacksonville, Florida airport. There were 5 contracts. He said he needed the originals so he could see them destroyed personally. She indicated that these contracts were in other locations. She would have to retrieve them, so he left the meeting and he was arrested. Turned out that the widow was a cooperating witness with the Department of Justice and was wearing a wiretap. It further turned out that there's a grand jury investigation into BSRG. Mr. Silnes was not charged with an FCPA violation, but with attempting to obstruct justice by seeking the return of these contracts. At least copies of these contracts had been presented to the FBI, so we have some idea what was in them. So once again, we have a cooperating witness, we have wiretap. Interestingly, we have a grand jury investigation. We don't see that very often in the FCPA world, but we do see that here. There have been no charges brought against BSRG as a company, and they vehemently denied they engaged in any bribery. Nevertheless, they have a contract with the now widow, 5 contracts for payments and then ongoing royalty payments based upon the monies generated from the project that was allegedly sent their way. So Mr. Silnes is in jail in New York, brought to New York, and he is set for trial in March. the original trial was in December, but it got pushed. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. But once again, this shows the Department of Justice and the SEC will use all of the tools that are available to them. And interestingly, that there's an ongoing grand jury investigation which we were not aware of before. It's unclear if PSRG was aware of this ongoing grand jury investigation. Next up is Uriel Sharif. Mr. Sharif is some of the continuing follow-on from the massive Siemens bribery scandal, which was settled back in 2008. If you recall, Siemens has the largest FCPA fine in the history of the world ever at $800 million. They also paid $800 million to German authorities, so a total of $1.6 billion. Mr. Sharif was a director of the Siemens Corporation, and he agreed to a civil judgment against him by the SEC. The significance is that first off, it was the second largest SEC agreed to judgment of all time, $250,000. He also agreed to not being on a board of directors of a U.S. public company. So the fallout from Siemens continues. Interestingly, late in 2013, Siemens announced that they were folding their chief compliance officer position into the general counsel role, but the general counsel would not report to the board, that the CEO would report to the board on compliance matters. Also, some additional individuals were indicted in Argentina by Argentinian courts for the Argentina component of the Siemens bribery scandal. So it's still percolating along, things are still going, the repercussions are still occurring. It's unclear why Siemens folded down their compliance program into structure they have. Nevertheless, the Uriel Sharif SEC settlement was significant for the factors I set out in those. Next up was Paul Novak. Paul Novak was an employee of Wilbrow's company. He is the third of four Wilbrow's former Wilbrow's employees to have enforcement actions brought against them. The first two individuals pled guilty and actually served jail time, but they're out. Mr. Novak received 15 months jail time for his role in this bribery scandal. There's one individual left, that is James Tilley. James Tilley is in hiding in Nigeria, apparently renounced his U.S. citizenship, and has not been extradited to the United States to face justice for the claims against him regarding this matter. Interestingly, if you'll recall my discussion of the corporate settlements, we had the Bill Finger corporate settlement in December. Bill Finger was a joint venture partner of Wilbrow's in the Nigerian project, which came to FCPA grief. So, even though it happened quite a while ago, it's still percolating along. And if and when Mr. Tilley is brought to justice, that may close out the Wilbrow scandal. We just have to find out. Next up was Alan Rado. Mr. Rado was a part of Maxwell Technologies. He was a vice president for Maxwell Technologies in Switzerland. If you recall, Maxwell Technologies settled an FCPA enforcement action back in early 2011. So we had a follow-on individual prosecution in this matter. As I indicated, he's a Swiss citizen. He was the vice president who allegedly not only approved the bribes that were paid, but also was the funnel through which the mechanism through which the bribes were actually paid. So he approved and funneled them to the parties who were bribed. Interesting that basically would be almost 3 years from the time of the Maxwell Technologies FCPA settlement to the time that Mr. Rado was indicted. He's not yet been extradited to the United States, so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But once again, it shows that I think the department has made clear that they will take a look at old enforcement actions. They'll look back and see if there are any individuals who might be personally liable under the FCPA for their conduct, whether the statute of limitations is run against those individuals. Here we have a Swiss citizen. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But a very strong signal sent by the Department of Justice, in my opinion, that they will go after really anyone, anywhere, anytime for an FCPA violation. Next up, we had Direct Access Partners. Direct Access Partners is significant for several reasons. First and foremost, it is the first FCPA action against an investment bank. And interestingly, as we saw with Alstom, we have individual enforcement actions brought against persons before any corporate enforcement action. So in June, or May or June, we had 3 direct access partners, individuals who were charged. One of them was a partner and 2 were salesmen. In August, the person they allegedly bribed at the Venezuelan National Bank, Bandes, was also charged. All 3 of the direct access partners' employees pled guilty in August. And in November, the Bandes employee, Ms. Rodriguez, pled guilty. So we have 4 guilty pleas. None have been sentenced as yet. And it would appear that the investigation involving the corporation is ongoing. Ms. Rodriguez was a foreign official because of her role at the Venezuelan National Bank. She was not charged with FCPA violations. She was charged with anti-money laundering. And to me, the most interesting thing is that she was extradited to the United States by Venezuela. So in spite of the perhaps rhetoric that ongoing between the government of the United States and the government of Venezuela, there's cooperation on some level. So I found that very interesting. Not only did they allow charges to be brought against an official at one of their at their national bank, but they extradited her to the United States. All 4 pled guilty. There have been no sentences yet. So what does all this mean for FCPA individual enforcement going forward? I think that it's pretty clear that the department's sending the signal that they will go after people. They will go after people aggressively. They will use the tools that are available. I can't say that they will use any sting operations going forward, but this year's enforcement actions prove they really don't need sting operations because they have cooperating witnesses that can bring other parties to justice. So kudos to the Department of Justice for bringing individual enforcement actions, whether that was in response to commentary, critics, or other. I guess it really doesn't matter at this point because their efforts are ongoing. I would opine that going forward in 2014, this trend will continue. It's certainly something that many congressmen would like to see. I think certain commentators have also suggested that individual enforcement actions might be a way to excuse me, facilitate FCPA compliance across the board. So interesting for this year. If you would like more information, I hope you will check out my ebook. Once again, it's 2013, the FCPA Year in Review. It's available on Amazon.com. If you have any questions on any of what I've talked about in either the corporate enforcement actions, which I discussed in episode 31, or the individual enforcement actions, which I discussed in this episode, you can reach me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. So until next time, thanks a lot, and look forward to visiting with you again.